Wulfgar stand. Wulfgar looked out over the broken city as more and more silver-bronze warriors marched from the dark. Whole phalanxes of skeletal figures advanced toward the main thoroughfare, where a line of Eisenstein-Rossen bridges shimmered with baleful green light, gateways to other worlds. Since word had reached them that survivors of the Walsiaks had returned to Nitwertha through a portal behind their lines, everything had changed. Now, entire districts of the Xenos necropolis were stirring to life. One by one, the portals flickered out. The green, water-like event horizons of the ancient transit engines rippled, shuddered, then collapsed into emptiness. The gathered Xenos troops stood in perfect silent confusion as their pathways across the stars winked out of existence. Their hollow eye lenses dimmed fractionally, as if stunned by a command they had not expected. Behind Wulfgar's defensive line, the battle echoed through the buried city, booming reports rolling like thunder through the labyrinth of drowned stone. Thousands of green glowing eyes turned toward the previously abandoned sector of the necropolis. None of them knew it was now occupied by Void Revenant forces. They simply watched the now dark dolmen gates behind them, as if awaiting orders, or contemplating the sudden, impossible severing of their own empire. Then the detonation of the relic box, Deacon Absalon's seemingly innocent reliquary, lit the black sky of the cavern. The shockwave of the conversion field blast tore open the veil of sea fog, revealing the titanic rock roof that held back the trillions of tons of ocean above the ancient necropolis. The shockwave rolled across the empty streets, crashed against the cavern ceiling, and thundered over the gathered phalanxes of Necron troops who had been poised to invade a rival's homeworld, only now realizing that they were stranded within their own capital. What thoughts passed through the mind of the Iron King were unknown to any living creature. But Khon-Thek Drac-Arak, seated upon his cold metal throne atop the greatest of the pyramidal citadels, kept his gaze locked upon the troops below. His lords and attendants looked from the troops to the darkened quarter of the city where, unbeknownst to them, Wulfgar's forces lay hidden, then back to their king. Questions lay unspoken on metallic lips, but none dared speak. No one had questioned the Iron King in life. No one dared to question him in his long death. At last, the ancient overlord lifted a single, skeletal finger. The brass etchings along his forearm caught the light from his guard's glowing blades. The order was unmistakable. The lords turned at once, striding down the vast stairway with long, purposeful steps. If they could not wage war upon a distant alien world, they would redirect their fury upward, toward the people of Nitwertha above, and the Void Revenants who had brought this irritation to their king's notice. Threxek Marak led them. A lord of his own right, who in life had commanded entire worlds and legions during the war in heaven, he had sided with the Iron King against the mad psychomancer of Xenok. He stalked to the central plaza and raised his ancient blade, Light Drowner. The assembled troops turned in unison, thousands of metallic skeletons locking into perfect formation, their feet slamming the stone as if the necropolis itself were waking. They had purpose again. Beside him walked Drazek Thekanukot. He did not raise his weapon. He let it hang, its blade pointing to the flagstones like a judge's pen ready to condemn. Drazek was of no noble house. He had clawed his way up the ranks through calculation and efficiency, recognized by his peers as a master tactician and architect of order. His title, Blade of the King, was an honorific never meant for battlefield slaughter. The blade it referred to was a metaphor, one meant to cut through tangled data streams and reveal the most efficient truth. At the end of the war in heaven, he had been indispensable in constructing the great necropolis beneath this world. It was testament to his attention to detail that when the ocean had been lowered upon the Iron King's new tomb realm, the cavern roof had not collapsed and crushed them flat. Despite this, the Iron King had intended to cast him out, dismissing him as unworthy to share the same eternal crypt. Drazek, of course, had his own necropolis elsewhere, a smaller domain built to his own austere specifications. He would have been content to withdraw to Karelak Nak, ruling over those risen from the dregs by intellect rather than noble birth. But Threxek had argued on his behalf, threatened to withdraw his own legions if the king cast him out. The Iron King had relented, perhaps choosing to keep the most untrustworthy close, rather than allow him to plot in a distant tomb. Now he walked beside his old ally once more, though Necrons no longer possessed the subtleties of emotion their words once implied. Together, the two lords marched to war. "Your intention?" inquired the blade of the king, its voice a metallic scrape echoing through the plinth-lined chamber. Threxek Marok transmitted a data cant, formations, force deployments, and a descending priority list of orders for every unit under his command. Drazek received it, processed it, categorized it. He showed no outward emotion, he could not, but internally he metaphorically rolled his eyes. His old companion was a master of carnage, unmatched in tenacity among the Iron King's lieutenants. But Threxek could sometimes be painfully single-minded. The plan was simple, too simple. Push a line straight across the necropolis until it reached the cavern wall, then spread like water through culverts and artisan galleries, exterminating the intruders section by section. It was effective, it was logical, it was predictable, and in this case, wrong. His reply carried the echo of the sardonic tone he had possessed in life long ago, an affectation his neural cortex simulations still mimicked. "Ah," he said dryly, "the old tactic. Advance directly to the main roadway north of the city." "You find error?" Threxek asked, optic nodes narrowing as he lifted his scythe. Drazek stepped atop the plinth beside him, gazing across the mustered legions below. Rank upon rank of metallic warriors stood in perfect formation, brass dull with age, bronze patched with oxidization, strands of barnacle-encrusted seaweed trailing from their limbs. And yet, even after aeons, they still looked proud. He recalled what they once were before biotransference. Hunched, dying mortals riddled with cancer, disease, and the rot of a doomed empire. An army of the infirm standing firm in defiance of gods. That defiance still burned behind their hollowed green optics, now carried in ageless bodies of living metal. He spoke carefully. "The road the enemy occupies is a highway, a natural ridge that runs the length of the cavern. It separates the artisan vaults and storehouses from the warrior clades. It was built as a defensive divide." Threxek nodded. "I remember you constructing it. You said it would prevent rebellion." "Yes," Drazek replied, "though it hardly mattered. The Iron King never permitted the lesser dynasts to set foot in the city. Their fate was entropy, not entombment." Threxek surveyed the ranks again. The king was not in error. Those mortals held the slant at bay while we completed our work. Their loss was of no consequence. Besides, it saved power expenditure on stasis chambers. "True," Drazek allowed, "but that means the entire warrior host stands on this side of the highway. The intruders have free reign of the far temples and vaults." He turned a blank steel skull toward his comrade. "Your plan requires crossing a defended ridge under fire. Heavy artillery is useless. The roof spine array will distort or collapse above us. It will be a march assault." "My warriors have endured worse," Threxek said. "Indeed," Drazek replied, "but our army has only just awakened. Cohesion is still reforming, and there are only 2 crossing points. The main thoroughfare bridge, a bottleneck kill zone, or the far wall causeway above the pumping station temples." Threxek's optics flickered. "The causeway is flooded. The sections above the pump structures rise high, with no cover on the left flank and the cavern wall on the right. A perfect gallery for enemy marksmen." "Which," Drazek said, "is why we send doomsday arcs. They skim water, they carry troops. The flood matters not to them." Threxek considered, calculating parallel tactical paths. Then he nodded once. "Very well, old friend." He turned to the blade of the king. "And you shall lead them." Drazek froze. "I do not believe the king desires a gutter-born functionary like myself to lead warriors of his majesty's household." Threxek lifted his scythe again, pointing toward the distant causeway. "Which is why you will lead Konthek Drarok's elite cadre." Drazek blinked, a meaningless gesture, but one his cortex still simulated. "I fail to see the logic. They will be exposed. Casualties will be extreme." "Just so," Threxek replied, looking back upon the phalanxes. "And who will guard the king once his warriors have been reduced?" He turned away, metallic footsteps echoing as he descended. Drazek remained still for several seconds as the calculations aligned. His chance of advancement had just increased considerably. On the raised roadway, Wulfgar watched the gathering storm. His augmetics whirred softly as he viewed the scene below through the drifting servo skulls Osric had sent aloft. Their lenses cast cold beams across the drowned necropolis, revealing two figures standing in the great plaza, warriors of rank, perhaps Necron lords, or whatever this ancient machine empire called its hierarchy. They were speaking, no, calculating, gesturing in slow, deliberate arcs as data passed invisibly between them in streams of ghost light. Farther still, upon the largest pyramid, Wulfgar's optics caught the dull, corroded silhouette of the Iron King himself. Coward, Wulfgar thought, jaw tightening. What kind of ruler hides atop a throne while sending his warriors to die below? What sort of lord stands idle while his kingdom burns, surrounded by sycophants and lesser retainers? He found himself idly wondering how none of the Iron King's more imaginative commanders had yet cut the rusted tyrant down and taken his mantle. He tapped his Crozius casing impatiently. Below, the two Necron lords continued their silent council. One seemed to address its assembled warriors, lines of bronze and barnacled constructs standing as rigid as tomb pillars. The other lord stalked off, disappearing behind a broken mastaba. "So it begins," Wulfgar whispered. Orders, silent and instantaneous, rippled through the phalanxes. Ranks shifted with perfect clockwork precision. Lines reformed, weapons angled as one, and farther away, like the first ripple of a rising tide against a seawall, the dead legions began to advance. Slow, unstoppable, merciless. For the moment, they were hidden between the towering monoliths, ziggurats, and pressure temples of the necropolis. But Wulfgar knew they would reach the high road soon enough. And when they did, the Void Revenants would be waiting. Wulfgar was no tactician, he was a chaplain. For centuries he had led men through faith and fury, not through strategy. Others commanded, he inspired, he kindled their oaths. But now, as the tide of living metal drew near, he found himself doubting his own reasoning for the first time in memory. The ancient city spread out beneath the Geofon sea, deep within the crust of Nitwurtha itself, their chapter's homeworld. Vast caverns held pyramids, ziggurats, arenas, and tombs of a race long dead, their bodies replaced by cold steel and unfeeling circuitry. The vaulted roof was supported by unseen energies that defied understanding. These beings had once mastered the Eisenstein-Rossen bridge network, weaving green-lit portals between worlds as easily as men crossed rivers. Now their Iron King warred with another of his kind, the psychomancer Nek Vo Thren, who had somehow forged an alliance with the Void Revenants. Wulfgar understood little of that, and less still of the strange logic of machine souls and Xenos dynasties. His command was small but formidable. 5th Captain Godric, entombed within his dreadnought sarcophagus, led the siege detachment. 2nd Captain Tunbald held the flank with 2 squads of his Grey Company, and with them were the ever-pessimistic runesmith Osric and the irrepressibly cheerful Gastweird Cuthelm. Cuthelm crested the rise beside him, looking toward the far side of the city where the great pyramid of the Iron King loomed in the distance. "I could teleport us," the librarian said, sounding far from confident. "I thought you had to be in line of sight," muttered Osric. Cuthelm nodded. "I can put us down right in front of that pyramid. See? Just there, where those 100 or so Xenos warriors with the heavy weapons are." Osric regarded him with visible disgust. "By the Omnissiah, librarian, you truly are deranged." He turned away, opening a vox link. "Brother Godric, status?" "The enemy infantry are 3 blocks away. As the raven flies," Godric's deep metallic voice thundered over the vox. 2nd Captain Tunbald shifted uneasily, his helm turning toward the distant, half-flooded causeway. "I still think the causeway is a threat," he said. Osric looked at him, one eyebrow visibly raising even through his helm vox. "Godric has a heavy weapons squad covering it from the mastaba on the left side of the first pump house. That part of the causeway is open and high. These metal warriors are on foot. Not one will make it that far without being molten ornaments." "All the same," said the 2nd Captain, jaw tightening, "if the enemy get onto the road at that end, they will sweep our defense." Wulfgar heard the argument for the 3rd time. He swung to face the 2nd Captain, irritation rumbling in his rebreather. "We barely have enough troops to cover the road, and you want to divide us even further on a paranoid whim?" He pointed toward the far end of the cavern. "You'd sit out the battle aiming at nothing while your brothers fight." Toonbald bristled. Sit in a defense line and wait for the enemy? You're an iron hand, not a Worthen, and you can tell. Wulfgar's response was a growl. I am a Void Revenant, your chaplain, and you will respect your founding chapter and my station. Around them, the Gasthelms stopped building their barricades, eyes shifting between the two officers. Toonbald spat onto the stone. A brother Scop should not have to order respect, it should be expected. Osric stepped to Wulfgar's side, hand on the haft of his axe, his usual jovial smile notably absent. The Gasthelms shifted, hands drifting toward their weapons. Wulfgar's skullhelm turned fully toward Toonbald. Whatever expression lay behind it, the others could imagine well enough. Then Cuthhelm intervened. The librarian slammed his staff into the ground, a crack of witchlight rolling across the stones. Brothers, still yourselves. Your enemy is right there. He pointed toward the darkness where green eyes glimmered. If you have enmity, then a duel to the death after the battle will suffice to settle your oaths. Instantly, the Gasthelms returned to their work. Wulfgar, suddenly remembering his own office, lowered his helm. He nodded to the librarian, then addressed Toonbald more coolly. Your blade is needed. Your oath is kept. Take a squad and guard the causeway. We hold here. Come to our aid if called. He turned away. Osric lowered his axe and stepped beside him. You're under stress, brother. Straighten your back. Make everyone think you know what you're doing. Wulfgar glanced at him. The day I take advice from you, Osric, is the day the Emperor walks Holy Terra again. Then, grudgingly, he straightened his back. Osric grinned at last. That's more like it. He pointed across the defense line with his axe. I think I will die over there. He marched off, shouting at the Astartes, Don't break a sweat. These Xenos can barely walk, let alone run. Further back, Toonbald signaled 4 of his Grey Company to join him, then nodded to Cuthhelm and strode down the road toward the causeway. Cuthhelm smiled faintly and straightened his robes. In the wet reflection of a nearby wall, where water trickled like mercury, he saw the ghostly shade of Elfric, his long-dead master. Your iron hands shake your customs bitterly, murmured Cuthhelm. The whisper came soft and etheric, and you Worthen wear your emotion on your gorget. Then the shade vanished. Cuthhelm nodded to the empty air and moved off to aid in the defense. Wulfgar realized he was alone with Cuthhelm now. The librarian smiled at him, faintly, as if amused by some unseen jest. Scop Chaplain Wulfgar heard the rumble of assault bikes behind them and turned to see 10th Captain Herewulf and Wertweird Elfstan arriving at speed. Their mounts were pitted and scarred, caked in alien dust. Herewulf's bike even wore a tangle of seaweed draped over its fairing for reasons no one had time to explain. Wulfgar had not expected them. They'd been on a mission on the far side of the Arcana Inclusium, hunting for the other terminus of an Eisenstein-Rossen bridge discovered earlier on Nitwertha. Somehow they had returned through a gate with survivors from the Walsiaks and the original lost team. Herewulf killed his bike and saluted. Brother Chaplain, he said with a nod to the librarian. The survivors are out of the city, led by the deacon and the inquisitor. We have a few Arbites holding the entrance with melta charges just in case we don't make it. Wulfgar nodded. That is just as well. We are 70 Astartes against an entire civilization down here. Wertweird Elfstan nodded. True. Poor Xenos scum don't stand a chance, he said with a grin. Wulfgar folded his arms as he studied the 10th Captain and the apothecary. So, I am told you have a weapon to eliminate this so-called King of Iron. Konthek Drakarach, Elfstan corrected cheerfully. Yes, that's the plan. Wulfgar rocked his skull helm slightly. He pointed his Crozius toward the distant pyramid. That's him. I assume the weapon does not have the range. Herewulf glanced toward the pyramid monolith, its apex glowing faintly. I never said it was a good plan, he admitted. Elfstan leaned back in his saddle, scanning the approach. We need to get the enemy to come to you, bleed them out of the lower city. Then, when the time is right, me and the prince here will make a heroic run at the king. It's suicide, Wulfgar warned flatly. Cuthhelm hefted his staff, runes glimmering. Do not worry, they will not be alone, he said cryptically. Wulfgar looked to the librarian, then relented. I will endeavor to make a show of it, he said. He nodded to a ruined temple structure, low enough to be hidden from the opposite side of the raised road, high enough to be out of the floodwater. Hide your bikes there. You take no part in this initial clash. Keep your weapons dry and let us do the fighting. When you see a chance, we will open a gap in the enemy line." Beowulf nodded. "Then here we will hold. Fag word, Wulfgar, may the Emperor protect." Wulfgar waved them toward their hiding place, then looked up the road behind them. In the distance, a column of Void armsmen approached, led by Officer Hālgengas and Captain Sigibild. They waded through waist-deep water, flooding the downward road, runesmith Torhern bringing up the rear. He looked at Cuthhelm. "Our wraiths had better not let us down." Cuthhelm lowered his staff. "Let us simply ensure we don't make any more before this battle is done." He dusted his robes. "I trust you have conceived a plan?" Wulfgar nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I plan to lead our men in cowardice," he said dryly, lifting his crozius toward the void ship captain and his drenched crew. "Well met, shipmaster. Finally decided to get your boots wet with the rest of us instead of floating in the void?" Sigibild climbed the slope out of the water, saluting the 10th captain as he passed on his way to the temple ruin. "Not by choice," he called. "Had my wings clipped." Wulfgar nodded. "I hope to hear your tale later. It will make a fine epic poem." Sigibild stood beside him, looking down at the first signs of advancing Necron columns. "I hope I get a good part," he said. Helmsman Fur climbed up next to him. "That's Fur, with a Y." Wulfgar nodded. "I will make sure to take notes." A horn blast echoed from Godric's position. Wulfgar turned, then faced Sigibild again. "Captain, have your men in the building on the opposite side of the roadway. Give covering fire, but stay put until I call for you." Sigibild saluted, then called to Hālgengas. "Your men, deploy up there." He pointed to a flat-topped pyramid where 10th Company snipers already held position. Then he raised his sword and led his own men up the roadway to a line of mausolea halfway to the causeway. Torhern came up last. "Skop," he said as he walked past Wulfgar, adding, "I will find my own place." Wulfgar let him go. He closed his eyes, taking a moment of meditation, clearing his mind of doubt. Then, with a deep breath, he faced the battlefield. The enemy front ranks were almost in range of the heavy weapons. "Geofon Hālgengas, prepare to fire," he called. The first Xenos cohorts reached the long slope leading up to the raised causeway. Captain Godric stood at its crest, his sarcophagus towering against the glow of the green-lit gates. He leveled his twin autocannons and opened fire. The sound was like thunder in the tomb. The siege company followed suit, heavy bolters roaring, plasma cannons hissing and snarling in incandescent arcs. Rows of Necron warriors shattered under the barrage, metallic bodies torn apart, limbs sheared away. Still they advanced, silent and unrelenting, their ranks reforming even as the front lines fell. Wulfgar's vox crackled. Tunbald's voice came through, flat with static, holding the flank, for now. The chaplain raised his crozius, vox amplifiers bellowing a litany across the line. "Brothers of the Void Revenants, let these unliving things learn that even steel must fear faith." The bolters answered his sermon. The guns of the 5th Company spoke first. The raised roadway shook as the siege company opened fire in disciplined, overlapping volleys. Heavy bolters thumped in relentless rhythm, the roar of their barrels echoing from the stone flanks of the necropolis. Each detonation sent fountains of emerald light and splintered metal into the air as the front ranks of Necron warriors were shredded and thrown back down the causeway. Plasma cannons spat incandescent fury, washing the slope in blinding azure arcs that turned advancing constructs into molten slag. The dreadnought Godric stood immovable at the center, his autocannons blazing in alternating bursts, each impact tearing gouges through the advancing columns. His vox roared over the din, ordering range corrections, target sweeps, and liturgical affirmations in the same breath. Still the enemy came. For every metallic body that fell, another stepped over it, the dead dragging themselves upright, fragments knitting, joints hissing with green fire as broken limbs reformed. They moved without sound, without hesitation, their formations folding inward as multiple columns of the Undying converged on the slope. When the first of the Necrons reached the halfway mark up the incline, Wulfgar gave the order. "2nd Company, purge by fire and faith." Bolters barked from the flanks and parapets. The gray-armored warriors of the 2nd Company added their fury to the storm, disciplined bursts cutting through the mist and debris. Brass casings clattered down the steps in glittering streams. Flamers hissed, spitting gouts of promethium that rolled across the lower levels, bathing the climbing Necrons in liquid fire. The heat distorted the air into a shimmering haze, through which the metallic figures kept advancing, their outer shells glowing red before sloughing away into charred black. The echoes of war became one continuous roar, the mechanical staccato of heavy weapons, the percussive chant of the chaplain's vox litany, and the rising shriek of reanimating Xenos. 3 Necron columns now converged on the causeway, their emerald weapons lighting the darkness like a sickly aurora. Gauss fire began to streak upward, carving molten gouges into the masonry, shearing armor plates, and vaporizing the unlucky. Yet the Void Revenants did not break. From his position at the head of the line, Wulfgar raised his Crozius high, the green light flashing across its haft. "Hold! Let them climb! We are the sons of night and iron! Let them learn what darkness means!" The bridge became an anvil of fire and ruin. A Gastelm of the second took a Gauss beam full in the helm. The runes etched upon his pauldrons vaporized in a flash, and his armor began to melt from the head downward, liquefying as he collapsed wordlessly to the stone. A heavy weapon gunner of the 5th fared little better. The fallen obelisk he had used for cover was reduced to molten ruin, and a glancing hit tore through his arm. He set the plasma cannon to overcharge and broke from cover, charging forward as the enemy raked him with green fire. His armor disintegrated plate by plate, flesh burning to vapor. The glowing cannon dropped from his hands, landing at the feet of the advancing Necrons. The explosion that followed lit the city in a blinding flash, casting grotesque shadows across the ziggurats and tombs as the skeletal warriors advanced. Within a small temple behind the line, runesmith Torhern held back, his frame hunched over a hololith, a squad of the 5th standing guard beside him. They listened to the roar of battle echoing through the ancient corridors. Across the way, in another ruin, a shrine whose plinth bore a serpentine idol of some forgotten god, Hearthguard Cinnabil waited with his power hammer resting on his shoulder. The first squad of the 2nd Company stood around him in silence, listening. Above them, a servo skull drifted in the haze, its picked feed relaying the defense in grainy green light. On the pyramid above, the surviving warriors of the 10th Company, now only 5 in number, watched the battlefield unfold. The sniper lay prone upon the cracked stone, taking precise, lethal shots at anything that resembled a Necron lord or officer, while the others called targets in clipped, professional tones. Haregith sighted the Xenos designated by Osric's scouting skulls and relayed the coordinates to Ordmer, who repeated them to the heavy weapon gunners below. Around her, the Void armsmen waited in tense silence, rifles ready, bayonets fixed, knuckles white around their grips. A deep tremor shook the ancient structure as a heavy Gauss beam severed a pylon high above. The monolith crashed down, gouging the side of the pyramid and sliding into the flooded roadway below in a plume of steam and shattered stone. "Steady," she ordered. One armsman, already frayed by the horrors of the past days, finally broke. He threw his rifle onto the stone floor, panic-stricken. "You're mad. We have to reach the surface. The roof will fall," he cried, voice cracking. A single gunshot rang out. The trooper's body pitched backwards, bouncing off the splintered pyramid wall before sliding to rest in the shallow water pooling at its base. Silence followed. Haregith holstered her still-smoking pistol and swept her gaze over the men. "Anyone else wish to discuss the structural integrity of Xenos architecture?" she called, voice like steel. One armsman swallowed. "No, sir." Another muttered. "Emperor protects." "Good," Haregith said, turning back to her task as though nothing had happened. She resumed calling in ranges and firing coordinates. Around her, the Voidsmen exchanged glances. One bent, lifted the fallen trooper's rifle, checked the charge pack with practiced ease, then tossed aside his own weapon and shouldered the new one confidently. Far in the distance, halfway between the main battle line on the raised road and Tunbald's position at the causeway's head, Captain Sigibild watched with narrowing eyes. From his vantage point, he could see that the battle was, for now, going well. The Astartes held the line despite their small number and the ceaseless advance of metallic foes. He found himself wondering, not for the first time, Whether had Wulfgar and his warriors been on Xenoc from the start, they might have taken the city alone. The thought made him smile. He glanced to Fear, who rested on her sword beside him, watching the distant war unfold with that fierce, curious interest of hers. She was learning, quickly. Nearby, Garspec hunched over his Vox unit, twisting dials and muttering to himself, batting away a fleet apothecary who attempted to change the bandages on his head. Sigabild nodded, satisfied. His crew, veterans of Void War, boarding actions, and worse, were holding up better than he could have hoped. Their lifetime of battle in the cold dark had prepared them well. He turned his gaze back to the battlefield, watching the tide of metal falter under disciplined Astartes' fire. For the moment, just for the moment, hope was on their side. Threxech Thekmarak slid along the wall of the shattered temple. The sniper round had cracked his skull wide open, almost taking his head clean off. As his necrodermis began to knit back together with wet metallic whispers, he looked out across the devastation of his fallen troops. The stone flagging was carpeted in the scattered body parts of his warriors. A skeletal hand here, a bronze-plated skull there, its sickly green eyes flickering out one by one as more warriors marched over them without pause. He moved to the far side of the structure. There, another phalanx was being channeled into brutal enemy fire. As he watched, a plasma round detonated among their ranks, melting half a dozen warriors into steaming heaps of fused bronze and copper. This was intolerable. He sent a data cant to a forward phalanx officer, ordering his men to... The officer's skull burst open, bronze and copper spraying across the stones as a sniper round found its mark. The cold anger within Threxech snapped. He slammed a fist into the pyramid wall, the ancient stone cracking under the blow. Looking up the slope, he saw it. A human, one of the augmented kind, half machine, half flesh, wielding a weapon that belched lightning-hot plasma. Looking back at his troops, he saw the once-perfect column falter as another plasma charge tore through their front rank. The warriors took an involuntary step back. "No!" Threxech roared. He strode into the roadway, raising light drowner high. "All of you." He pointed the blade directly at the stone column sheltering the Astartes' heavy gunner. "Fire!" The Necron troops stopped retreating. Ignoring the punishing fire raking across them, they turned as one and leveled their Gauss weapons at the column. A storm of emerald lightning lashed the stone. The pillar turned incandescent, became translucent, then vaporized. The Astartes hiding behind it was torn into atoms by the combined blast. Threxech stepped forward, shrugging off a bolter round that ricocheted off his scarred chest plate. "There," he called again. His warriors pivoted as one, targeting a heavy bolter gunner using a rubble pile as a bunker. Moments later, the Astartes was simply gone, reduced to dust and molten ceramite. Again and again, with each target marked by Threxech, Necron bodies clattered and fell in droves, blown apart, melted, or shattered by the Astartes' fire. But each time one of the heavy weapons fell silent, each time a firing point dimmed, the advance edged forward. Their numbers grew. Threxech looked up. There, the skull-faced human he recognized. He knew little of humanity, but he understood this much. They were mortal. They could be killed. "Wulfgar," he bellowed, thrusting light drowner toward the chaplain. Though this Wulfgar was not the same he had fought millennia ago, 20,000 years younger perhaps, the memory echoed. His warriors aimed, their weapons screamed, and the world turned green. Wulfgar clambered to his feet, green beams slicing overhead. The defense wall, once a crude bulwark of torn-up stone flags, had melted or simply been vaporized. He could not tell which. For a heartbeat, he thought the Astartes who had stood beside him were gone too, but then he saw them dragging themselves upright. Relief washed through him. He rose, using his Crozius as a crutch. "Gastelm!" he barked. An Astartes moved to firing position, only for a tall figure to step from the haze. Very tall. Bronze and brass armor covered in rotting kelp. The curved blade in its hand swept once, shearing clean through the space marine. The upper half of the warrior liquefied before his helm even struck the broken ground. The towering Necron lord turned, raising his blade. "Wulfgar," he intoned. Wulfgar had no idea how this Xenos lord knew his name, and decided he did not care. He raised his plasma pistol and fired. The bolt splashed across the Necron's chest, melting bronze and iron. Threxech Thekmarak shrugged off the blast and strode forward. Gasthelm leapt at him, seeks in hand. Figward! Most enemies of the Void Revenants heard the cry, but never understood it. Threxek did. Figward! He answered back and drove his blade through the Astartes. With a contemptuous jerk, he ripped away the marine's helm, tore the melting armor aside, and pulled his blade free as flesh crumbled. He held the trophy aloft, only a green glowing skull that disintegrated into dust. Wulfgar roared, Geofon Hālgengas, and charged, Crozius crackling. Threxek darted back, grabbing one of his own warriors and hurling it bodily into the chaplain's swing. The Necron's body shattered. Threxek countercut, his blade scoring Wulfgar's pauldron and almost melting it through. Wulfgar tore the dissolving plate from his shoulder and hurled it at the Necron lord. Threxek knocked the molten fragment aside, but the motion robbed him of balance. Wulfgar hurled himself bodily into the Xenos, smashing the Necron lord into a broken wall. He punched again and again, gauntlet blows denting the skull face, leaving a deep imprint in the metal. Threxek kicked him away, raising his blade for the killing thrust, and then his torso melted. A blast of searing light struck him from behind. His head dissolved, the green fire in his eye sockets guttering out as his skeletal frame slumped and twitched. Osric stepped forward, bike-mounted Melta still steaming. He backhanded a Necron warrior with his axe, then extended a hand to Wulfgar. Wulfgar stood with the runesmith's support. "My thanks," he said. Osric nodded, firing another Melta shot that reduced a pair of warriors to bubbling slag. "That Xenos lord knew your name," he remarked. "Did you owe him money?" He seemed particularly offended. Wulfgar shook his skull helm. "I have never seen him before," he admitted. Osric shrugged. "Well, no time to lollygag. Still a war on. Best get back to it." The two Void Revenants readied their weapons and moved to reinforce the breach. Behind them, the body of Threxek Thech Marak phased out of existence, drawn away by its tomb's recall protocols, ready to reform in some distant chamber for the next round of war. The Necrons clambered over their fallen as they neared the crest of the roadway. Godric and Osric stood at the center of the crossroads, the heart of the defense. A toppled statue, once depicting the Iron King himself, had been broken down into rubble and repurposed into a makeshift parapet. Osric's mechadendrites coiled around the plasma coils on his back, venting heat as twin globes of blue light streaked outward, reducing two Necron warriors to molten wreckage. Through his servo skulls, he spied a tall, commanding figure striding toward the ridge. "Cleansing flame," he bellowed. All along the barricade, Second Company Gasthelms let their bolters hang from their straps and drew their hand flamers. In unison they opened fire, great waves of liquid promethium cascading down the slope. Fire engulfed bronze and silver bodies, crawling up their frames, burning into every joint and cavity. The Necron officer stumbled through the inferno, bellowing in a harsh mechanical tongue, ordering his troops onward through the flames. Osric raised his personal meltagun and fired. The blast struck the Xenos square in the chest. For an instant, a refractor field shimmered, then overloaded. The Necron's upper body liquefied into slag and fell in smoking heaps down the incline. Godric's dreadnought chassis thundered as he advanced a step, firing both autocannons into the burning mass. Fragmentation shells burst among the ranks, shattering metallic torsos and opening rents that the heat and flame poured into. For a brief moment, the tide faltered, the enemy ranks slipping and folding back down the slope. Missiles shrieked overhead, slamming into the densest clusters. Heavy bolters tore through the survivors, rows collapsing like harvested grain. Behind the defensive line, in another half-collapsed temple, Elfstan leaned against a cracked plinth, watching the battle's flickering glow through the open arches. Hjorwulf waited below, seated astride his scarred assault bike, engine idling, watching the picked feed linked to Osric's gun cam. "This Iron King of yours," Elfstan said, voice wry, "not the brightest of commanders. Walking headlong into entrenched fire, less cunning than a particularly stupid orc." Hjorwulf didn't look up. "Konthek Drakarak has little choice," he said. "The eastern road is the only alternate route to this quarter, and it's barely wide enough for two abreast. The second squad can hold it until the Emperor returns. Every other path on this side of the city converges here, at the crossroads where our brothers stand, so his army must come up that single ascent. Worse still, the flanks are boxed by sheer pyramids of solid rock. too steep even for his kind to climb. A frontal assault is his only option. Elfstan tilted his helm skyward, scanning the cavern roof far above, dimly seen through smoke and drifting dust. You'd think a Xenos species that mastered portal technology might field aircraft. They'd have dealt with us easily. Hjorwulf chuckled behind his rebreather grill. Likely they have them, but imagine their pilots trying to weave through the pylons that hold up this roof. One stray burst and they'd bring the entire vault down on themselves. Elfstan nodded slowly, conceding the point. That's why you're a captain, he said, and I'm an apothecary. Hjorwulf's laughter was brief, drowned beneath the next thunderous volley from the front. The next wave surged upward through the smoke. Wulfgar stood atop the shattered defense line, firing his bolt pistol down into the advancing horde. Beside him, Osric alternated between plasma gun and melt-a-weapon, switching rhythmically to maintain a constant rate of fire without overheating either. They don't learn, do they? Osric barked over the din, vaporizing another rank of skeletal warriors. Wulfgar shot 2 Necron warriors who were attempting to clamber toward the last surviving heavy bolter position. They don't need to learn, he growled. They just have to keep coming. We are almost out of ammunition. Far across the battlefield, Lord Drazek Thek-Anakote observed the struggle unfolding along the Grand Causeway through multiple overlapping data feeds. His metallic jaw hinged in a motion that might once have been a sigh. He turned, gripping the side of the nearest Doomsday Ark. The Iron King's elite guard stood ready, each one mounted in the skimmers now repurposed as assault craft. Drazek climbed onto his own ark, ignoring the unimpressed, silent looks of the elite warriors inside its armored ribs. He raised the long blade known as the King's Cutter, pointing it toward the sunken causeway where the Void Revenants held the line. "It is time," he announced. The engines of the arks whined, then stabilized into a predatory hum. One by one, the crescent-hulled machines drifted forward, their gravitic wakes rippling the flooded stone. They skimmed toward the battle, toward the slaughter waiting on the raised road.